Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Student Space. Today is really exciting because I get to welcome back Sabine. We've had her on a previous podcast episode before, which I will put in the description so you will be able to find it. So I previously interviewed her about her Bachelor of Arts and her post-grad law studies, so her JD at the University of Melbourne. We did have a follow-up question, and what we're doing today is I'm asking her to go into a little bit more detail about the clerkship process, about getting a grad role, and about the next steps to securing employment as a newly graduated lawyer. So if you do enjoy this episode, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and don't forget to follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast from. Enjoy! Welcome back, Sabine, to another episode of the Student Space. It's really nice to have you back. So this episode is going to be a bit of a continuation of our last one. So in the last episode, which I will link below, it is all about Sabine's journey from her Bachelor of Arts at Uni Melb to studying the JD. Now, we did have a follower question who asked more information about clerkships and getting jobs in law firms after completing the JD. So this is what this episode will be about. So perhaps start us off, what exactly is a law clerkship?
Sure. So a clerkship, that's like a legal clerkship, is basically kind of like an internship, but it's a paid internship. And basically how it works is in Melbourne, at least, it's different in other states, but in Melbourne, you're eligible, if you're a law student, you're eligible to apply for clerkships, and you have the opportunity to do 3 different clerkships. You have to have, 3 offers, but you're able to do at most 3. So how it works is you go to a firm for about 1 month and you just kind of get a taste of what it's like to be a lawyer at that particular firm. You are always allocated a particular practice group. So that might be corporate, that might be employment, something like that. Depends on the firm that you're at. And then, you just get a kind of idea of what the firm's about. So it's a great way to understand which firm might be a good fit for you and which maybe areas of law you're interested in.
Okay, I think it sounds like a fancy name for an internship or like work experience, right?
That is, yeah.
Now tell me, you can probably do these clerkships at a range of different firms, but what are some examples? Like, are they all like corporate firms? Are there any like small boutique ones?
Yeah, so basically there are quite a range of firms that offer clerkships. Majority are kind of corporate firms, but that being said, there's maybe, I can't remember off the top of my head, maybe 30, 35 or so firms that are called what they call LIV, or Law Institute of Victoria signatories. And that means that they've signed up to the guidelines that LIV set for clerkship applications and so on. So all of the firms, which includes boutique firms, includes some more of the government type sort of firms, I suppose, like the OPP, the public prosecution, and also like the Victorian Government Solicitor's Office, VGSO, that's another one. And then, some of the smaller firms as well are also on there. But otherwise, you do get big name firms like Allen's, Gilbert and Tobin, Baker McKenzie, and so on.
Okay, cool. Now, other than just gaining work experience, why else should students want to be applying for these types of programs?
Well, primarily your clerkship is your foot in the door to getting a graduate position. So most firms take grads from their pool of clerks. So that means that if you are lucky enough to do 3 clerkships, you're eligible to receive a graduate offer from those 3 firms. And most firms, like I said, they just take the grads from the clerk group already. So some firms do go to market, and I'll speak about that in a second. But most firms do take from their clerk group already. So that's kind of the foot in the door. It's how you sort of, it's a great way to start your legal career. It's a great way to get to know people in the field and make those connections really early on in your career.
Absolutely. Now tell me, what is the application process like? Like, for example, I'm assuming we're submitting things and then we're doing interviews, and what was the process like for you?
Yeah, so like I said in the previous podcast, I actually applied twice. So I wasn't successful the first time around, but I applied again the following year. And basically how it works is you have kind of, there's maybe 6 weeks or 2-month period in which applications are open, and then you can apply. So when you apply, it's kind of about the middle of the year, about July, August. When you apply, you have to submit things like your resume, cover letter, your academic transcript. But you also, for most firms, have to answer additional questions about that firm. So they might say, why do you want to work at this particular firm? Or they sometimes ask even more difficult questions like, tell me about, what makes you a commercial lawyer? Like, we value commerciality here, so what makes you a commercial person? Anyway, so that's kind of, it's quite long. They definitely do take quite long, the applications. And I think even outside of the application period, you kind of have to start thinking about where you might want to apply well before the applications open and are due. So it can kind of almost end up being a 6-month process. And then, so yeah, you submit your applications, and then if you're successful in getting an interview, those are usually in the weeks after you submit your application, and then offer day is about somewhere about 6 to 8 weeks after the application's closed. So it is quite a drawn out process. And then after offer day, you have another couple of weeks, and that's usually the first clerkship period.
Okay, cool. Do these all happen at the same time? Like, do all the firms have their start date at the same time of year?
So they all of the LIV signatories all have the same application date, due date, offer day date, and so on. That's what makes them a signatory. Some firms are not signatories and they offer clerkships outside of those times, but most of the firms, you have kind of a set time. So they call it summer 1, summer 2, and winter. So summer 1 is kind of November, December period. Summer 2 is sort of January, February, and summer 3 is kind of July or June, July. So some firms start at kind of, maybe a week apart or whatever, but it's all kind of around that time.
Okay, that makes sense. And are there different rounds? So what happens if you miss out in the first round? Do you get another chance later on?
So, like I said, I applied again the following year, and basically in order to apply for a clerkship, you need to be a penultimate student. Some firms do take final year students, but penultimate basically means that you're going to graduate the following year. So I was able to apply as a penultimate student twice because I extended my degree. But like I said, some firms do take final year students. It just depends on the firm. Usually you can find the information out on their website, or all of the law schools, universities have kind of clerkship guides, and they usually give you a lot of information about each firm and whether they take final year students and international students as well, for example.
Okay. So like a student in first or second year wouldn't be applying because, again, they're looking for a student in their second last year.
Right, exactly. So if you were doing the JD at Melbourne Uni, you can apply in your second year because that's your penultimate year, because it's just 3 years. But if you're at Monash and doing a 5-year degree, for example, you wouldn't apply to your 4th year.
Okay, cool. Now, if I miss out on these clerkships, do I have other options for work experience or job opportunities?
Yeah. So you definitely have opportunities for work experience within uni. So at Melbourne Uni, they have a kind of internship subject, which is called the public interest law initiative subject. And basically that's where I had the opportunity to intern. It wasn't paid, but it was an internship at the Community Legal Centre. So it was a great way for me to learn about what it's like to be a lawyer there. And I had a really good time, and I ended up staying on as a volunteer at that CLC for a while. So that's one option in terms of getting work experience. Other things that people do is sometimes people shadow barristers, which can be paid as well. Sometimes barristers need research work done and so on. So that can be a really great way to get some exposure to the court and just kind of the life of a barrister. And if you miss out on clerkships overall, there are definitely other things that you can do. I mentioned before, some firms go to market. So that means that they open up their applications to anybody. Even if you didn't clerk at a particular firm, you're still able to apply for a graduate position at that firm. So that's very common. And the final, I guess, kind of outside of just the corporate or the clerkship pathway and graduate pathway, a lot of my friends have kind of gone through the court system. So some of them become judges associates or work in the registrar at the courts. That's also another fantastic way, particularly if you're interested in kind of court work. And then I suppose the kind of last option is that if you don't have a job lined up or something like that immediately out of uni, In order to become a lawyer in Australia, you have to undertake your practical legal training anyway. And that's kind of when you do PLT. So as a graduate next year, I'll be doing my practical legal training as part of my graduate year. So the firm pays for my practical legal training. Other people who don't go through the graduate year, they can just go to a particular school. So it might be the College of Law to do their PLT. And that's basically like another semester of uni. So it goes for, I think it goes for about 6 months. And you learn all the things, the more practical skills about being a lawyer that we don't really learn at uni. And then at the end of that, once you've passed your PLT, then you're eligible to be admitted as a lawyer in Australia.
After that PLT, do you still apply for grad roles, or are you just applying for normal roles?
Both. You can do both. So some people have come into grad role. Most people come into grad roles having not done their PLT. So their graduate role is kind of the year where they're doing kind of lawyer work, but they're not yet a lawyer. And other people come in to a graduate role who've already been admitted. So it's possible for both. But yeah, you can also just look for lawyer roles once you have once you finish your PLT.
Okay. Now, just talking about the grad roles again, is the application process similar, just as competitive as the clerkship process?
Well, when I mentioned before that you are eligible for a grad offer if you've clerked at a particular firm, so what happens with that is that you don't usually have to go through a whole application process again. You kind of just submit your cover letter and resume again, and then the firm, like I said, they select from their clerks and they offer you a position or don't. If you are unsuccessful in getting a graduate position from one of the firms that you clerked at, or if you didn't do a clerkship, then you do have to go through more of the typical kind of application process where you would have an interview again, submit all your cover letters and so on, which would be, probably as kind of similarly challenging and sort of time consuming as when you apply for clerkships, for example.
Okay, cool. Going back a bit to clerkships, I just had a question I thought of. Are they typically paid or are they volunteer work?
They're all paid, so it's really good. So it's like I said, it's an internship, but it's a paid internship. So that's the kind of benefit of it. So it's a great way. And also, oftentimes when you do a clerkship, there's an opportunity to work as a paralegal, for example, at that firm that you clerk at afterwards if it arises. So, but for example, I was a clerk at Baker McKenzie last year in December, and then I was subsequently a paralegal this year, earlier in the year, for a couple of months. It's kind of a great pathway to continuous employment after your clerkship.
Okay, cool. And now, of course, like I've heard like students talk about like getting a clerkship or getting a grad role is just like the Hunger Games. It's so competitive. Everyone's super nervous. What advice do you have, and particularly around, managing rejection, because I guess it's inevitable?
Yeah, that's right. And it does definitely suck. Obviously no one wants to experience rejection. Personally, I found that when I wasn't successful the first time around, it really encouraged me to just kind of look at my application and what I was putting forward and thinking, and really sort of forced me to think, well, how am I going to make myself a better applicant? If I want to apply again, I'm going to need to change something. So I think for me, it ended up, even though I had to go through your pain of rejection, I ended up coming out a lot better the following year, and obviously I was successful that time. So that was a really kind of good and helpful tool to push me along. I will just say that if you don't have the opportunity to clerk again in the future, like if you miss out, if you get rejections and you can't try again later on, there are so many. I mentioned all the other ways that you can get a position after uni as well, but one more thing that I just thought of is that, like I said, I mentioned kind of paralegal work, and oftentimes at a lot of firms, paralegals is another pathway to becoming a paralegal, is another pathway to becoming a lawyer at that firm. So the firm that I currently work at, which is called Wilcox, they kind of, a lot of paralegals come through there, and they often sort of come through their graduate program or otherwise become lawyers. So I think that, you just have to kind of think outside the box, think, okay, I missed out on this opportunity, but that just means there's a better opportunity out there for me somewhere. And I'm just going to think about how I can go about that, maybe in a more creative way than I was initially expecting. But, it's certainly possible.
You know what you've mentioned? So many different opportunities. And it's just nice to know that, hey, we can get knocked down or we can face rejection. But when you did apply the next year, you would have had so many different experiences on your resume to really, bring to the table next time.
Yeah, in fact, I even talked about in my interviews, I talked about the fact that I'd failed the first time around. And I think that's a question you often get asked in interviews. Tell me about a time that you failed. And for me, it was just kind of really obvious that I could piggyback off that, because it was a time, coming down from, okay, I really have to think about myself and my application here and make myself a better candidate. And clearly, yeah, it worked for me. So sometimes I can't recommend failure enough. I think it's sometimes helpful for us.
Absolutely. And now, do you have any final pieces of advice for current law students going through this process?
Yeah, I think my main bit of advice would be, no matter where you're at in your degree, whether that's you're in your first year, just learning about the law, or whether you've maybe gone through the clerkship process, you're about to start a clerkship, or you've been rejected, is to just go out and talk to as many people as you possibly can. Have conversations with students, with lawyers, with anyone you can possibly talk to, and talk to them about their journey and how they got where they are. Because the reality is that, yes, a handful of people kind of go through the clerkship program, but many people get to firms in other ways. And for me, it was really helpful to just kind of open my mind a little bit, to think, okay, well, that's it's a really interesting conversation that I've had with that person, and it's really interesting to see how they've gotten to this particular position they're working in now. And it just kind of, something might stick in your head later down the path. You're like, okay, yep, I know that I can rely on what that person said, or that person did this, so that's good inspiration. I think that's the best way to just figure out maybe what you might want to do down the path, and it'll just help you become, overall, whatever you end up doing, it'll help you become a better lawyer if that's what you do.
Such wise words and some great advice. Thank you again, Sabine,
No
for joining
worries.
me on another episode, a little extra bonus. I've loved it. So thank you again.
No problem. Thanks.